non-religious society working in International Islamic University for law students to enhance their advocacy skills and promote legal education among the law students, and providing a forum for discussion and debate on legal issues. So our today's topic is harassment laws of Pakistan. So now let me introduce our honorable guest. So today's our honorable guest is Miss Maheez Zeeshan, advocate. Miss Maheez Zeeshan is also a law clerk with the Honorable Chief Justice of Islamabad High Court. And lastly, I would like to welcome our President of the Society, Mr. Qadir Shah. So over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Yasser. Assalamualaikum, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well. He's already introduced me. I'm Maheez Zeeshan. I'm the law clerk to the Chief Justice of Islamabad High Court. I've been invited here to talk about harassment laws in Pakistan. Now, I believe most of you are students, or maybe all of you are students. So I'm going to start with the very basics, and then we'll come on to what the laws actually are in Pakistan. Acha, Yasser, can you tell me if this is a question and answer session? Can they ask me questions? Yasser's gone. Anyway, if you do have any questions, you can ask me. But so I will start.
Introduction of the topic.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Ma'am, you can start with the introduction of the topic.
That is what I'm starting with. What I'm asking is, can they ask me questions during this?
No, ma'am, we will give time to the participants and the end to ask the questions.
All right. So the first and foremost thing to understand about this is what exactly is harassment. Any sort of bad behavior that is annoying you.
topic है ये join करो मजे का है भी चला harassment के बारे में.
Can you please mute yourselves, everyone? Thank you. Any sort of weird behavior or obscene behavior which annoys you in public cannot qualify as harassment. Harassment has two main ingredients. The first is the harasser's own conduct. The harasser's own conduct has to be such that he is willingly and deliberately making someone else, at the very least, uncomfortable by doing something or by saying something. And the second element is that the victim of such harassment actually feels that discomfort or actually feels a certain amount of threat to themselves. Such an instance would be an instance of harassment. Now, I'll give you two separate examples. One example is in a public space, let's say a shopping place, like a mall or something. Now, when you walk through a mall, people might stare at you. Is that staring harassment or not? In my view, this is how I see it. Someone staring at you is not enough to qualify for harassment, because I'm just walking through. If someone is staring at me, I might get uncomfortable for a bit, but I'll still walk through, and that discomfort ends then and there. Additionally, in that moment, there is no evidence that you have to prove that the person staring at you actually intends for you to be uncomfortable. So when we talk about harassment in public places or wherever, these two ingredients are what we must keep in mind. The second example is in a workplace. In a workplace, it's not going to be a stranger staring at me. It's going to be someone I know. It could be a colleague. It could be, let's say, a client, a boss. It could be anyone, but it will be someone that you work with on a daily basis. Now, they will know you. They will know you personally and they will have some understanding of what sort of behavior you are used to. This is an objective understanding. So in that setting, if someone, let's say, I'll give my own example, if I'm sitting in an office or a workplace, and let's say someone is sitting in front of me and he's just staring at me. Again, I can't prove that he willfully, deliberately intends to make me uncomfortable. However, if he says something to me which makes me uncomfortable in a way, that could qualify as harassment. However, now I'm coming to the harassment laws aspect of this. When you when we have to translate an offense into law, basically that will entail penalizing someone for a certain action, right? In order to impose that penalty, the law has to be very clear on exactly what that offense is, how that offense is to be proven, and then comes the penalty aspect of it. So with instances of harassment, the biggest difficulty is defining what that offense is, and that is what we have in Pakistan have struggled with legally, because under law everything has to be very specific. It has to be precise, specifically if it's attracting a criminal penalty, because a criminal penalty will most probably take away the accused's liberty. So in order to justify the taking away of that liberty, that offense has to be very clearly specified. The ingredients have to be very clearly specified. Now I'll give another example. Let's say there's an open-ended definition of harassment which only states that if someone is making you uncomfortable, they're harassing you. So let's say I'm walking through a mall, there are two men staring at me, they've made me uncomfortable. I go lodge a complaint against them, they get arrested. Now, objectively speaking, that is not fair. It is not fair because the penalty is disproportionate to their actual act, which is they were standing and staring. So when it comes to the legal definition of harassment, now again, this is something that is still under debate. I'll start from the very basics. I will start from the Constitution. So the Constitution gives you a set of fundamental rights. These fundamental rights include the right to equality and the right to not be discriminated against in public places. I believe this is Article 25 or 25A of the Constitution. Yes, 25A holds that all citizens are equal and there shall be no discrimination on the basis of sex. And Article 26 holds that it provides for non-discrimination in respect to access to public places. Now, when we talk about harassment, discrimination does come into play. Always remember, any country's laws reflect that specific country's society. So all the laws that we have in Pakistan are made specifically for the problems that we face in this very society. We will not compare the standards or the offenses to other countries' laws. Why? Because in every country, there is a certain need and the law will then cater to that need. So in Pakistan and in the society that we live in, sadly, the biggest issue of harassment that is faced is by women in general. There are instances of men being harassed or boys being harassed. However, these instances are still in the minority. The majority offenses that are committed in terms of harassment are against women. So harassment against women is a gender-based offense. If I were a man, I would not be harassed in a public place. However, the fact that I'm a woman makes me vulnerable to this harassment, which means that this is gender-based discrimination. So when we talk about harassment, inadvertently, we will include our constitutional rights to not be discriminated against, our constitutional right to have equal protection. This is where our legal provisions regarding harassment, this is where they stem from. Because a person specifically harassing you is targeting you because of the gender you are from. Now, I see a hand raised here. Does anyone have a question?
If you guys have any question, you can send in the chat as well.
All right, I'll continue, but if someone has a question, they can send it in the chat. So
Otherwise,
other than
mute your mics. Participants, please.
So we start with our constitutional rights to equality, to equal protection, and to not be discriminated against on the basis of gender. If you keep gender aside and you only look at such behavior, this has been catered to in PPC. So there are two main provisions that highlight such behavior which could amount to harassment. There is section 294 of the PPC, which deals with obscene acts and songs. And it basically states that anyone doing any obscene act in any public place, or anyone who sings or recites or utters any obscene songs or words in or near a public place, they shall be punished with imprisonment and so on. So section 294 makes it an offense for you to commit an obscene act or to say anything or to sing anything which is obscene. Obscenity's definition you can find in all your legal dictionaries, but it will just be an act which is out of the norm and it has a negative impact on the people around the person committing that act. So section 294 is a very general offense. It does not take into consideration genders. It does not specify harassment. However, it does make it an offense to commit an obscene act or to say something or sing something which is obscene. Now, this could include catcalling. I hope you're all aware of what catcalling is, but catcalling Urdu mein kaha jata hai awaazein kasna. So let's say a woman is walking through a street and there are people in that street who are just calling out to her, saying certain words. That would be catcalling, awaazein kasne. So such an act would attract the offense of section 294 because such an act is obscene. They're behaving in an obscene way or they are uttering something which is obscene. The next provision of PPC, which I want to talk about, is section 509. Now, section 509 specifies sexual harassment. This provides for the insult of modesty. Modesty kya hoti hai? Modesty for a woman, my modesty would be someone if they assassinate my character, if they use derogatory terms, that would target my modesty, right? So anyone insulting modesty or causing sexual harassment, they are punishable under section 509. Now, section 509 has two parts, two subclauses, and you can read this on your own time. They're a bit long, so I'm not going to read them all out. However, This section specifies gender. It specifies that the insult to the modesty of any woman. So it specifies woman, which means this is a gender specific provision. This is not a generally worded provision like the previous one was. But this also holds that anyone who insults the modesty of any woman or utters any word or makes any sound or gesture or exhibits any objects, intending that such word or sound shall be heard or such object shall be seen by a woman or intrudes upon the privacy of a woman. Any of these acts, they would attract this offense. So again, I'm sure all of you must have seen at least one example of such things happening in public places in your lives. Chahe wo koi bazaar ho, whether it's a street, whether you're driving. These days I've seen there are a lot of women on bikes and scooties in Islamabad. And I do see what happens to them every time they've stopped on a signal. There are people recording videos of them. There are people making gestures to them, or there are just people staring at them. But whatever they're doing, they are targeting a woman because she's a woman. A man on a bike will not attract such attention. So in such situations, Section 509 would be attracted because one, it is a woman-specific provision, and secondly, it prohibits any sort of insulting or obscene behavior exhibited towards women. Part 2, Clause 2 of Section 509, it deals with sexual advances. So now this is another distinction we must make: harassment and sexual harassment. So sexual advances or demanding sexual favors. For example, there are cases, I'm sure most of you must have heard of such instances as well, because these are actually very common here. Men generally tend to blackmail women. Let's say a man has acquired my pictures from somewhere, or he has some videos of me or something of the sort, something personal to me. And he could blackmail me using that material. He could blackmail me by threatening that if I don't do what he wants, he will publish them on social media, he will circulate them, it will ruin my reputation. So this would be specifically sexual harassment, as opposed to the previous example of a woman on a scooter or a bike. That might not qualify as sexual harassment, but it is harassment nonetheless. So sexual harassment is a more specific sort of offense, and it is again very, very gender specific. In our country, majority of the victims of such acts are women. So most of our judgments, most of our laws, they specify women because that is the need in this country. But there is an ongoing debate about whether or not harassment laws should not be gender specific but general. And I'll come to this after I'm done with the PPC provisions. So subclause 2 of Section 509, it deals with specifically sexual harassment. It explains what would amount as sexual harassment. And then it goes on to specify the punishment and the legal repercussions. Now, these are two very basic provisions. The first provision that I went through, it is not gender specific and it is not harassment specific, in the sense that the words harassment or sexual harassment have not been specified in this provision. This is Section 294. They have not been specified, whereas in Section 509, the word women has been specified and the word harassment and sexual harassment has been specified. So Section 294 is a more generally worded provision. It would attract a lot of more other obscene actions. However, Section 509 is a more specific provision. It specifically caters to harassment and sexual harassment of women. Now that brings me to the next debate, which is whether or not harassment should be a gender specific concept. I personally think that harassment should be more open, it shouldn't be gender specific. And sexual harassment aside, harassment occurs in many different ways. Harassment could be, let's say, we're all either lawyers or are about to be lawyers. So let's say a client starts spam calling you. They start calling you at odd hours during the night, at let's say 11 o'clock in the night. They've called you, you haven't answered, they call you 20 times. Or they show up at your house. That is also, in a sense, harassment. They are harassing you. They're interjecting themselves into your personal life, into your personal time. That would be harassment. Now, if we stay stuck to the gender specific definition of harassment, we then can't cater to such situations. Let's say I'm on the road and a car just starts following me. It's trying to cut me, it's trying to sideline me, it is overtaking me, brake checking me on the road, or whatever. That would also amount to harassment. However, it's not sexual harassment. And let's say it's not me, a woman, it's a man driving the car and another man is doing that with him. Just because it's a man and not a woman, does that mean that that act is not an act of harassment? It does not. So harassment should be a more open concept. It shouldn't be gender specific, and it should not only be limited to sexual harassment. Because if you limit it such, then you can't cater for all those other acts that do happen and for all those other people who are victimized by such things. You can't cater to them if you limit yourself to just women specific definition of just sexual harassment. So we do have an act which is titled the Protection Against Harassment of Women at Workplace Act. So now, this act in its very title is very specific. It pertains to women in the workplace. This sort of narrows the scope of what this act can cater to. It can't cater to public places. It is only about the workspace. So now, just this distinction, I believe, is not too unreasonable because we already have two generally worded provisions in our PPC. So those are the general provisions. They will apply to a workplace and a public place, both. This act, however, applies only to instances that happen in workplaces and applies to only women. That is the basic understanding of this act. However, there has been a judgment of the Supreme Court by Justice Aisha. The definition of workplace harassment in this act was challenged in court. And eventually this case reached the Supreme Court and Justice Aisha delivered the judgment in this case. And I can, if you want, I can share the citation of this judgment with you. It's not too long of a judgment. It's a 16-page judgment. It's an easy read. I'll share the citation later with Yasir and he can convey it to you all. But in this judgment, Justice Aisha explored the definition of harassment and whether or not this act should include harassment of men as well. And in this judgment, she decided that if you read all the definitions mentioned in the act, this act applies not only to women, but it applies to men as well, because it uses words like employees and it uses words like persons. So it doesn't only cater to women, other than the title. The act doesn't only cater to women, it caters to employees and people in general in workplaces. Then she goes on to discuss whether it only caters to harassment or whether it caters to sexual harassment specifically. She has found in her judgment that it caters to harassment in general and not specifically sexual harassment. Now, again, we have to go into the gender-based discrimination debate when we talk about harassment in general and sexual harassment. Harassment in general, I've already explained, it's just behavior that would make anyone uncomfortable. Sexual harassment is more specific. So before we can understand exactly what sexual harassment is, we must look at what the word sexual includes, what the word sexual would mean in law. So when you use the word sexual, it automatically includes gender. And when it includes gender, it becomes a gender-specific debate. So this Act of 2010 under Section 2H defines.
Hello, ma'am. Sorry for interrupting you, ma'am. We will start the meeting with another link because this link will end soon. So we'll share another link with you for next 30 minutes.
All right, are you ending this now?
Yes, we are ending this link now, and we are sharing another link with you, ma'am.
Okay.
Participants, please join with another link we have shared in the group, and